I love you, Cleveland, and I love you, Ohio, and a very pleasant welcome to this week's version of Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. Hi, I'm Bruce Drennan, along with Ryan Smith, back in our studios at Burke Lakefront Airport, state-of-the-art studios for the Big Play Network. I'm in Cape Coral, Florida still, and we'll be here for the next couple of weeks, and then I'll be heading north. I understand the weather's good there today, huh?
Yeah, it's not bad. A little bit of sunshine. It's peeking out. Hopefully that pattern will continue because I am very, very sick of the cold. And as you can see, Bruce, I am very, very white.
Well, I actually am becoming more and more a Floridian, I guess, because I played golf yesterday and I had to put my windbreaker on. It was 65 degrees.
I'd be out there in a tank top.
We do have a lot to cover, believe it or not. I get a kick out of these fans that say, "Oh, what are we going to do now that the NFL season is over?" Get a life. But we have plenty to cover. Off-season rumors, of course, the draft with the NFL, that's fine. But we're going to be concentrating more, at least on our show, with the NBA second half, the prospects for our Cavaliers. As a matter of fact, today we're going to be featuring in the second segment Gene Winters. Many of you are familiar with Gene. He is a long-time former producer of mine, both on the radio and also at the television network when I was working for the Regional Sports Network. Now Bally's. He is part of the Cleveland Cavaliers television crew that televises the Cavs games. He is the statistical graphic designer, and he is an expert at the NBA, even though his favorite sport is baseball. But we will be touching base with Gino. So we'll be concentrating on the NBA here as we proceed, as we conclude the month of February and head into March. We are also going to be previewing the upcoming baseball season. Starting today, I'm going to take a division each week here on the show and give you my preview. Today, in the third segment, along with the Ask Bruce portion of our show, in that third segment, I'll be previewing the National League West. And also, we're going to cover college basketball a lot more extensively. And I'm lining up some guests in that regard coming up here on Bonus Time with Drennan. But let me begin by just pointing this out about the Browns, and then I want to get some input from Ryan on what's happening back home with anything. As you know, because of the Deshaun Watson trade, we're depleted of draft picks. We do not have a number one draft pick in the upcoming draft. We do have a second round pick. It's 54th overall. We have a third round pick. That's 85th overall. We do not have a fourth round pick. We have two fifth round picks. Number 134, we got that from Carolina. And number 154, we got that from Arizona. We also have two sixth round picks from Houston, pick number 204. And also in that sixth round, pick number 207 that we got from Baltimore. And then lastly, we do have a seventh round pick, and that is number 227, which we got that from Atlanta. I have read, Ryan, and here, let me interview you for a change. I read that there's been some rumors, I can't believe it, but about trading Chubb because, at least putting him out there because maybe that knee is not healing as properly as they had anticipated. After all, this is the second time he's injured the same knee.
Yeah, Bruce, certainly the talk right now is all about Nick Chubb. And Not so much trading him, but there are concerns that he could possibly potentially be a cap cut casualty because I think right now it's around 11.5 to 12. Realistically, though, what's going to end up happening, I believe, is that which I pray and hope, and I'll do everything I can. I'll sleep with his jersey under my pillow. That they make a way to make that work, right? But they're going to have to come together and kind of restructure that, which we know can be done. We've seen it done before. Because yeah, we do know that the unfortunate reality of the running back position is it is kind of one of the most interchangeable there on the gridiron. However, we know damn well Nick Chubb is one of the best players, honestly, the Browns have had since they came back. And he's been a top 3 back in the league consistently since he's been in the NFL, right? But they're going to have to figure out something with the money to move it, whether that's, like I said, a restructure there, but that's going to have to come from both sides. Nick Chubb's going to have to be willing to do that restructure. But, and it doesn't take a genius. Everybody in Cleveland wants to see him retire a Brown. They want him to be a Brown for life because he's certainly probably the biggest fan favorite here in Cleveland. And, we'll get this figured out in the next couple months or so what's going to happen. But yeah, realistically, if Nick Chubb's going to remain a Brown, and I think he wants to, I sure hope so, is they're going to have to figure out something to restructure that contract.
Well, I'm, a couple things on Chubb. He, at the beginning of last year, you'll recall, this last season, said that running backs are vastly underpaid in the NFL. And I think there's a case to be made about that, particularly because longevity of a running back is less than any other position in the NFL. And here he is into the season against Pittsburgh, re-injuring that knee and being out for the entire year. So I hope they can work. First of all, let's hope that he's healthy, and then and he can be the same running back that he has been these last few years. They talk so much about Henry of Tennessee. I think Chubb's the best running back in the NFL. Saquon Barkley, all of them. I just think he's the best. Anything else happening with the Browns before we move on?
Honestly, Bruce, not much other than the Browns fans. We all love to look at the free agents and figure out who we can get, and obviously the big one is receiver. We're not sure yet how Barry plans to attack that, whether that's just drafting a receiver, which they'll probably do regardless with one of their picks. But you look at the free agents. Some of them are talking about T. Higgins, Mike Evans, but those two are probably unrealistic. I think Mike Evans is going to want too much money, and then T. Higgins is probably going to get franchised. There's a little bit of talk right now about potentially if the Chargers were to cut Mike Williams because they can't really afford him and Keenan Allen. I don't believe he would be reuniting with Deshaun Watson back in their Clemson days, actually, which would be pretty interesting. But other than kind of figuring out, talking about what their options are with Nick Chubb, not much is really going on, but the draft combine is right around the corner, so we'll get more Browns news, of course, when that happens down there in Indianapolis. But right now, it's a little bit quiet on the Western Front, Bruce.
Well, in the case of Higgins, Cincinnati, you have to anticipate that Burrow's going to be back at 100% start of next year. So they have to keep his weapons available to him if they want to get back to the Super Bowl, which they very likely could do with a talent like Burrow. The other thing I read where as many as 7 receivers could be taken in the first round of this year's draft, which is kind of interesting, as opposed to 5 quarterbacks. So that will be interesting to keep an eye on. Following the San Francisco 49ers overtime Super Bowl loss to Kansas City, Coach Kyle Shanahan fired defensive coordinator Steve Wilks, even after telling reporters that he expects all of his coaches to be back in 2024. So that's about it. Again, I want to remind everybody, in case you are a new viewer to our show, we stream the shows here on the Big Play Sports Network, and our studios are in the Burke Lakefront Airport in the wing, the corridor of the museum portion. You see that astronaut, so you may see some people walking by periodically, and especially to gawk and look in on Ryan. I mean, he's such an extraordinary talent and great looking young man. So you have to be understandable about that.
Thank you, Bruce. I hope everybody has that sentiment about me. I don't think it might be true, but one can hope.
Well, I haven't lost my talent for being full of it. I think that goes without saying. Listen, last Wednesday, the Ohio State University fired men's basketball coach Chris Holtmann. The Buckeyes had just lost their 9th game out of their last 11 contests. They were then within 1 game of last place in the Big Ten and in position to finish 13th in the regular season for the 2nd consecutive season. New athletic director Ross Bjork will now be searching for a replacement to Holtmann, who was in his 7th season at OSU. In Holtmann's first 5 years, he compiled a 107-56 record, and he led the Buckeyes to 4 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances. However, the last 2 years have been disastrous for a program that seeks to be one of the best in the country. Under Holtmann, the Bucks were 9-25 this year. So there was that. So what happens in the very next game after Holtmann gets fired? Ohio State, look at Ryan laughing over there. Ohio State plays Purdue. All season long, Purdue has been ranked number 1 or number 2. All season long. So they go into Columbus, and what happens? But Ohio State knocks off Purdue 73-69 in his first game since Holtmann was fired. Interim coach Jake Diebler pulled off perhaps the biggest upset of this college basketball season. The Boilermakers came into Columbus ranked number 2 in the country at the time with a 23-2 record. Ohio State led for the majority of the game. The Buckeyes are now 15-11 on the year. Came into the contest with a dismal 4-10 Big Ten record, which is one of the reasons that Holtmann was fired 4 days previous to this game. Now, the Ohio State defense forced Purdue into 14 turnovers and 6 by the All-American Zach Edey, who shot Purdue shooting 16 of 42 from the field. Horrible. Meanwhile, Diebler has been with Ohio State since 2014, when then coach Thad Matta hired him as a video coordinator. Diebler's dad, Keith, coached high school hoops in the state of Ohio for nearly 4 decades. His brother, John, you'll recall, played 4 years at Ohio State. He was a sharpshooter. He was drafted in 2011 in the NBA. And it goes without saying that this win will help Diebler's cause to be named the head coach at Ohio State. Outgoing AD, Gene Smith, was all over him with hugs and kisses. Unbelievable story. But other possible candidates to replace Holtmann include Dusty May, the Florida Atlantic head coach, who led them to the Final Four last season, you'll recall. He learned his basketball, by the way, under Bobby Knight at Indiana. Lamont Paris is another candidate, head coach right now at South Carolina. He has the Gamecocks in contention for the SEC crown with an overall record of 21-3. Sean Miller, head coach at Xavier, formerly at Arizona, and left amid that scandal, you'll recall, the federal investigation alleging that he paid DeAndre Ayton $10,000 a month back in 2017. Greg McDermott, the head coach at Creighton, more about him in a minute. Nate Oates, head coach at Alabama, where he had compiled a 109-49 overall record. Mike Cronin, head coach at UCLA, formerly at Cincinnati, and is known not to be happy about the lack of support during the offseason on the NIL front at UCLA. Now, I mentioned McDermott at Creighton. So what happens last night, following the unbelievable upset of Ohio State over Purdue? The number 1 ranked team in the country, UConn, gets knocked off by McDermott and Creighton, 85-66. This is Creighton's first win over a top-ranked opponent in 7 tries, and it ends a 14-game win streak for UConn, and they now have lost, get this, 21 straight road games versus ranked teams. I didn't know that until I did some research. Creighton is now 20-7 and 11-5 in the Big East, and UConn 24-3 and 14-2 in the Big East. So on the college basketball front, these are 2 enormous stories, right?
Yeah, I'll just start with Chris Holtman and the Buckeyes. Obviously, it's crazy, but at the end of the day, it's what's this narrative about Purdue, right? They always find a way to choke. Usually, it's a little bit later in the season, and obviously, that's not me saying they're not going to make the tournament or anything crazy like that. Obviously, they still will, but I mean, credit to Debo, right? Buckeye favorite, been there for a little while. And I wanted to ask you, Bruce, but before I ask you, I'm going to just talk about the Dan Hurley and UConn. That stat you said about them losing that whatever, how many games that was. When I saw that, I almost couldn't believe it because you go back to last year, they win the national championship. And I mean, I've stuck to this. The Big East is, I think, the best conference in college basketball right now between UConn, Marquette, and as you just mentioned, Creighton. I mean, that's a gauntlet. So anything can happen in there. But Bruce, I want to ask you, going back to the Diebler and that upset with Purdue. I mean, how much do you buy into, like, and we've seen it across multiple sports, not even just basketball. Like, go look at football with Antonio Pierce and the Raiders. That these players immediately following the game that their head coach gets fired, it seems like they just get up for the game more. They play with more juice. You know, it's almost like they want to prove that it was the coach, it wasn't the players. Like, how much do you buy into, like, how much that affects just their mental state heading into that next game under the first game with the new regime?
It's a great question. And covering sports as I have for all these decades, I cannot emphasize enough how emotions come into play big time, particularly in football, basketball, and hockey. Not so much in baseball. If you let your emotions get into it in baseball, you're going to atrociously fail. You've got to approach pitch by pitch by pitch if you're a hitter, and as a pitcher, pitch by pitch by pitch. You cannot let emotions get involved. But in the other sports, no question about it. So, yeah, I don't totally concur. And, you know, here's the other thing. You mentioned Marquette. First of all, the margin in this game, Creighton beating UConn, was 85-66.
Yeah.
Connecticut had already beaten Creighton earlier this year. But 85-66 is not a close game. And here's what blows my mind. Just Saturday, last Saturday, UConn beat Marquette 81-53. It's the largest margin of victory ever in a top 5 conference matchup since the beginning of the AP Top 25 poll, and that's 75 years old. So how do you explain this? I mean, I guess the only way to explain it is the unbelievable parity in college basketball, and that anything can happen come tourney time. March Madness is right around the corner. I told you at the beginning of the show and last week, now that we've got the football season concluded, we're going to be concentrating a lot on college ball. And Kansas was a winner over Oklahoma the other day, 67-57. Will Bill Self yet win another? Kentucky has been hot and cold. They beat Auburn, who shot 17 of 55. And they're a good team this year. So, and it was at home. So I don't know how we are going to predict this upcoming. First of all, how do you fill out a bracket? How?
Yeah, Bruce, I mean, just go look at the standings right now, right? UConn just fell. Purdue just fell. Those were 2 of the top 3 teams. Houston is still standing there. They're obviously going to jump to number 1. But then beyond that, like, I mean, you have Tennessee, Iowa State, Duke, Kansas, UNC, all with 5 losses at least already in the season. Like, I feel like in previous years, you had your at least one or two juggernauts that were this far in the season with just one loss. And it's like this year more than ever, it's going to be a crazy March Madness. And I said the same thing last year, and then now it's got even more kind of that parity. So I'm excited. I think it's good. It makes March Madness a little more fun, a little more interesting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it raises the question, can UConn win back-to-back national championships? It's becoming more and more difficult. It's becoming more and more hard to believe that any school can do it, which is all the more reason that enhances the argument that I have made for a lot of years. John Wooden is the greatest basketball coach of all time. He won 7 national championships in a row and 10 out of 12. I know the format was different back in those days, but still, he was going from game one up against the top competition in the country, even though at that time it was only a 16-team field. Still, his very first game was against one of the top teams. The next game against an even better team. The next game. So it's hard to believe that anybody can win 2 in a row now.
Yeah, I literally just looked it up on my phone because I couldn't even tell you the last time that a team went back to back in the March Madness tournament. Did you happen to know who it was, Bruce? Because I just looked it up and I didn't know.
It certainly wasn't Houston.
Do you want the year?
No. Let me see if I can guess. It wasn't North Carolina. Was it Duke?
No, it was not Duke.
Krzyzewski didn't do it, huh?
Not back-to-backs.
I give up.
06 and 07, Bruce. Florida did it, led by Joakim
against
Noah.
Ohio State, the 1 year, absolutely, with Billy Donovan as their coach, absolutely. And the 1 year beating Conley and company and Ohio State.
Yep.
What was the big center's name for Ohio State that got hurt in the pros and never could fulfill
I believe you're thinking of Greg Oden.
Oh, Greg Oden. Yeah. Yeah. The Florida Gators. Isn't that something?
That just goes to show you. Hasn't happened in over 15 years.
You want to hear a good one? Again, we're here in Cape Coral at a house that we're renting. And my wife's in the next room here listening to the show. And when we were wondering who was the last team to win back-to-back, she yelled over, Gonzaga.
They sure wish.
Mark Few, the head coach of Gonzaga, could only dream of winning one, let alone back-to-back. And they're down this year.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are.
Compared to other seasons where he's had such great teams going back to Morrison and so many others throughout the years that we thought could win it and never did. All right, let's shift gears now. Yesterday, the management committee for the college football playoff format approved the 5-7 model. What that means is it decreases the number of automatic bids for a conference championship by 1. And it adds an extra at-large bid. This occurred because of the disbanding of the Pac-12 conference. The SEC and the Big Ten has pushed hard for this, and I happen to agree with them. We should want the best teams in the country in this new 12-team format. And now it still allows one of the group of 5 for a spot for a team from the MAC or Sun Belt or ACC or Conference USA or Mountain West to get in. Although, and that's fine. I can live with it. I understand. John Steinbrecker's a friend of mine. He's the commissioner of the Mid-American Conference. And with all due respect to the MAC and all those other conferences, you can't tell me that a champion from one of those conferences is necessarily better than a team with 2 or 3 losses from the SEC or from the Big Ten, such as a Penn State or somebody like that. I mean, just take a look at Liberty this year against Oregon. They lose by 50 or whatever it was. So there's that. But the conference championship games will most likely determine 4 automatic bids and thus a bye in the first round. So, and I've got a little problem with that too, because if indeed, this last year, Iowa had upset Michigan, for instance, I don't necessarily, there's no way that they were one of the top 12 teams in the country. See what I'm saying with that, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on with that. And obviously, one of the biggest losers, probably the biggest loser from this format, is now, of course, Notre Dame, who is an independent, right? So let's say they were the best team in the country. Well, they're not in the conference. What are you supposed to do about it, right? So they're obviously I think then they have to go be one of those at-large teams, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
I disagree with you on this. Because Notre Dame, I'm glad you brought it up. Notre Dame is an exceptional case. With their nationwide fandom and following, love them or hate them, if they have a 1 or undefeated, it's a no-brainer. If they have a 1 or a 2-loss team, they're going to get serious consideration for an at-large, very serious. So I don't foresee this forcing Notre Dame, for instance, to join the Big Ten. They play in the ACC now in basketball and the other sports, but I don't foresee that happening. I think that they can very happily maintain their independence in football and their deal with NBC to just continue to schedule who they want, except for those ACC teams to keep their eligibility in the other sports alive. They have to schedule a few ACC teams in football, but I don't see that as an obstacle to them, Ryan. On that one, I would disagree with you, because Notre Dame is Notre Dame. 1 or 2 losses gets them in regardless.
Yeah, but what I meant was, so like it's the 5 conference champions get the bye, right? Isn't that how it works?
4. I mean, there's only four conference champions from the SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12, and then the best conference champion of the group of 5, the max of the world.
Okay. But
that's the 5.
So in this format, is Notre Dame unable to get a bye because they're not in a conference?
If Notre Dame, good question. If Notre Dame has an undefeated season, they will definitely be a top 4 seed, especially if the rankings have them there, and especially if the committee, the college football playoff rankings will still be in existence by the committee. And Notre Dame would be one of the top 4 teams without question if they're undefeated, especially because of the difficult schedule that they play from year to year. That would be a no-brainer too. They could very easily get a first-round bye, even as a 1-loss team. Even as a 1-loss team, it's feasible if there's other 1-loss teams to be in consideration with Notre Dame getting in there.
Yeah.
Top 4.
Let me ask you this, Bruce. Like, so as an Ohio State fans, do you think that this new format is almost, I'm trying to find the right word to use, not beneficial? Because even with that 4-team playoff format, you were consistently getting into that playoff, right? Pretty much every other year. And then Michigan kind of came out of the woodwork and really started to, obviously beat Ohio State 3 times in a row. Do you think that this new format is almost, like I said, I'm trying to find a better word for it, but not beneficial, because they were still consistently getting in with the 4 teams, and now you have a larger group of competition?
Well, I don't necessarily my choice of words when I addressed this story was that I felt, how did I phrase this? Conference championship games will most likely determine 4 automatic bids.
Okay.
Most likely is the way I phrase it. So in other words, here's the reason I phrase it that way. Let's say the Big 12 or the ACC champion has 2 losses.
Yeah.
And Ohio State and Michigan go undefeated again, and they play in their regular season finale. One team loses and sitting there with 1 loss. Same thing with Georgia and Alabama in the SEC, or a Notre Dame with a 1 loss. I don't necessarily think that it's an automatic buy. It's an automatic berth. It's a bid if you win your conference in the Big 12 or the ACC, the examples I'm using, you get in. There's no question. With 2 or 3 losses, and they're not going to win 3 losses, but you get my point.
Yeah.
But they won't necessarily get a bye as being one of the top 4 seeds.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Food for thought with this, though. It really will be fascinating next season. All right, finally, before we move on, here's another sport we're going to be covering more extensively now that we are approaching spring: golf. Hideki Matsuyama came back from a 6-stroke deficit this past Sunday, firing a sensational final round, 9 under par 62 at the Riviera Country Club to win the Genesis Invitational. He wound up 17 under, and he blew away the field of contenders, winning by 3 strokes. 9 birdies and no bogeys for Matsuyama. And this marks the 2nd lowest round in Riviera Country Club history. This was his 9th tour victory. He has now won tournaments on some of the most difficult courses in the world. He won a major championship at Augusta National, earning the green jacket. He won at Muirfield in Columbus, Jack Nicklaus's pride and joy. He has won at Firestone South in Akron. And he's got to be considered a serious threat in April to win his 2nd major at the Masters, especially because he loves and plays great at Augusta National. So my hat's off to Matsuyama. I think he's a great player. And I think he's a real threat for the upcoming Masters. By the way, Tiger Woods had to withdraw in the 2nd round of the Genesis Invitational because he became ill. Whether it was the flu or not, I don't think we got a further report. But I saw the video of him requesting aid, and they pulled a golf cart out to the hole that he was on and carted him off, and he looked pale. He looked, his facial expression, he looked like he was sick. So we can only wish him well, but no word on the next tournament that he would play in. Next up, by the way, on the PGA Tour is the Mexico Open. And get this, Ryan, it's staged in Nuevo Vallarta, Mexico. My wife is reacting to that because over the course of the last 40 some years, we used to periodically, just about, there were like, I don't know how many years in a row, but if we missed one year, we'd go the next 4 or 5 to Puerto Vallarta. And Nuevo Vallarta, Nuevo stands, that means new. That's the new Vallarta, which is just north of the main city. And we actually stayed right next to this golf course, this championship golf course they're going to be playing at, and had breakfast a couple of times right there at the club. It is a magnificent layout, absolutely gorgeous, right on the ocean. And so I'm going to be glued to the television this coming weekend to see them play in the Mexico Open. So that has a special meaning to me, if you will.
Yeah, I remember just talking about Matsuyama. I remember when he won that Masters. That was a great year. Bruce, the Masters is probably outside of March Madness one of my absolute favorite things to bet on. One of my favorite things to just sit there, be lazy, and watch all day. And I gotta say, one of the greatest broadcasters ever, in my opinion, Jim Nance. He does a phenomenal job year in and year out, and I can't state enough how forward I am looking forward to the Masters this year.
I wholeheartedly concur with you about Nance. No question, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's at the top of his game amongst all of the network play-by-play men, and he does so much golf stroke by stroke description for us on CBS. And indeed, very much looking forward to the Masters, as we all are. Although my favorite is the U.S. Open because par is a great score and I love seeing the best players on the planet humbled like the rest of us saps.
Makes us
We'll be
feel a
back
little
in a
better,
minute
huh?
with Gene Winters and the NBA. We're going to talk about the NBA, dive into the Cavs season. That's next on Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports.
Now here is the risk that Brown had to take with.
All right, great to have you back with us on Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. As many of you know, following my career over the decades, I have had many producers, but the most prominent of all of them, and Ryan, of course, is a very talented young producer that I'm very glad to say is now part of my life and staff here with the Big Play Sports Network. But without question, Gene Winters has had such a major impact with me in my career, first on radio at WKNR when I was doing morning drive back at the turn of this century is when that was. That's how long ago it was. And then years later, when I was hired by Sports Time Ohio to host a television show that preceded the Indians games at that time. And they asked me for a recommendation on a producer, and without hesitation, I mentioned Gene's name. He had always done radio, but he's a fast learner, and he learned television like that, and was the producer of my show for many years on TV. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers telecasting crew wanted to utilize his talents, and so they stole him away from me. I totally encouraged Gene to do so for the benefit of his own career. And for now, quite a few years, Gene is the main statistical graphic designer on the Cavaliers telecast that you watch on Bally Sports. And he is an NBA expert, even though his favorite sport is baseball, which reminds me of John Wooden. And Gene, you may remember this, when we were together at WKNR Radio when I was doing Morning Drive, I interviewed John Wooden. And I just mentioned him in the first segment to Ryan as the greatest basketball coach of all time, winning 7 national crowns in a row and 10 out of 12. But his favorite sport was baseball, as is the case with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always good to be compared to Wooden as well. So I know our careers are going, in the same path, or I'm following in the footsteps that he already laid. But, it's funny when you're I shouldn't even say funny. It's ironic, you're talking about, the connection from 2000 to where we are now. Next month, 17th year of All Bets Are Off or Drennan Live, whatever you want to call it. Just back at the of a television show to go that long. Well, it always amazes me still to this day that 15 plus years of doing the same thing on a cable channel is still something that it's just remarkable. So it's been a great run that we have had together, and I always look forward to the time that we spend together and still spend together now.
Well, thank you for joining us. And we have you on for a very important reason, and that's to pick your brain about the Cavs and this NBA season as we are now in the second half and heading down the stretch. So let's start with the Cavaliers. Gene, how many of our colleagues around the country do you think predicted that the Cavaliers, especially after being out physicaled, if you will, by New York in the first round last season, How many of them around the country could have predicted that this team would have the record that they have and be the number 2 seed in the East?
Right, this many right here, 0. I mean, just go back to last year, how they got bounced, as you were talking about. You know, they were manhandled by New York, and then it was doom and gloom after being the 4th, 5th seed last year. The high expectations that they had with Donovan Mitchell coming in, and the great run that they put together. Unfortunately, last year it seemed like the injury bug hit them late. Now this year you come around and you're floating right around 500 for the first month and a half, 2 months of the season. You're thinking, great, well, I mean, we were supposed to be improved this year, and next thing you know, Garland goes down and Mobley goes down, and then it's you write them off. I mean, there's no way they're going to stay relevant at all. And then they put together the best stretch in the NBA from December 16th to where we are now. Now the Clippers are in that mix if you go back that far, but you look at what they have been able to accomplish without those 2 stars on the team, and they were still a 2, 3, 4 seed. Then you get them back, and they continue to put it together. It's been an amazing accomplishment what JB Bickerstaff and his staff has been able to do with this team, and the players themselves. I mean, they were able to hear all the negativity that was surrounding them and how the season was over when those 2 went down. They rallied together. I want to say they won their first 2 games. They were kind of smoked by New Orleans. And then after that, right before Christmas, things just turned for them. They turned into a high volume 3-point shooting team, and they went on this fantastic run that they are on, grabbing that 2 seed and hopefully staying in that position. Because when you look at Milwaukee and New York and Philly, it's going to be interesting to see if any of those come up to their level, surpass over these final.
Last year, I was saying after the loss to New York, you cannot win in the NBA playoffs 4 guys against 9. That was the case against New York. So Kobe Altman, to his credit, we're going to get to Bickerstaff in a minute, but Kobe Altman, to his credit, has added depth. And I think some of the guys that were on the roster last year have stepped up a little bit. I'd like you to comment on that. Do you see the Cavs in a much better position regarding that 4 against 9 scenario that I painted as we head into these playoffs? Because they can't, it's a foregone. You still can't win it with the big 4 that the Cavs do possess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one thing that they wanted to make sure that they were able to improve on. And I think you're getting, some very good bench production because these guys had to step up, especially when this injury bug hit. They had to step up and perform. And then you were able to see what Sam Merrill is able to offer, what a Karis LeVert can do coming off the bench now, instead of floating back and forth between a starter and a reserve. Isaac Okoro, when he was starting, he was great. I mean, you only think of him as a defender, but he can also score. He can easily give you 10 to 12 points a game and help shut down or help defend the opposing team's best player. So there is very much needed value with what he brings to this team. And you're able to see that because when a Donovan goes out or a Garland has to sit or even a Mobley or an Allen, you have quality pieces coming in to replace those guys now. Not to say that last year the guys weren't ready. Now you have that taste of that playoff basketball. Donovan's going to get his points. I think he's become a much better facilitator this year, passing the ball and not just being a scorer, knowing that when he has to, he can take a game over. But I think the bench depth that they were able and have been able to develop this year, even a guy like Craig Porter Jr., in that stretch, I know he just got his contract and he's going to continue to bounce between the G League. But this was an undrafted rookie free agent coming out of Wichita State, and he had a career high game of points, over a 12 rebound game, an 11 assist game. So you see the value that they're able to find in these guys, and the coaching staff and the players around them believing in each other and getting the best performances out of your reserves has been a nice piece to see for this team. And they've been able to score now off the bench. Last year, they were one of the top, I think it was top 5. It might have been top 7 where their starters scored the majority of the points, where they were up in like the 80s or 90s, where the bench was only scoring 20 a night. Now you're in that production where you can get 40 or 50, sometimes even 60 points from your bench, depending on the night. So it's that nice balance now where you're not running the starters into the ground either.
Are they going to be physical enough to advance in the NBA playoffs and perhaps seriously challenge Boston for the Eastern Crown? And that comes down, I guess, to a specific question about Allen and Mobley. Can they do it? Is the rest of the team going to be able to help them with the physicality portion that we know exists in the playoffs? Because the officials let them play even more physical in the postseason.
Yeah, and I keep going back and forth on, and it's something I think about almost daily. I think the experience last year of knowing how physical New York was against them, and just mainly talking about Mobley and Allen, knowing how much Randall and Mitchell Robinson went after them. I think that was their wake-up call now. We've seen a couple of physical games here and there. You had the scuffle a couple of weeks ago with Jared Allen and Ben Simmons. So I think they're trying to not let last year happen again this year. I think what you're able to see from Mobley this year, he went off in the offseason and gained 20, 25 pounds of muscle this season. I know it's hard to see on his lanky body, but he definitely has bulked up this year. So I think the experience of it last year, the newness of it, and not knowing what to expect, I think that's only going to benefit the Cavaliers this year when it comes playoff time and being able to be physical, because now they know what to expect and they don't want that embarrassment of last year, hearing about how soft they were all off season.
Ryan and I have touched upon this in previous shows, especially during the great streak when they were missing both Garland and Mobley. How can they not give serious consideration? I mean, if you stop the season right now, how does Bickerstaff not win Coach of the Year?
No, especially when you're fluttering around 500 for the 25 games. I mean, there was rumbling, really making a move and bringing someone else in, kind of doing what Milwaukee did, knowing that you had this talent base here that you didn't want to so-called waste another season. And then all of a sudden things turn around. I mean, you look at what he's been able to accomplish in his now 5th season with the Cavaliers. It's amazing that it's been that long already, but each year the team has got better. Last year, they finally made that step into the postseason. This season, you're hoping to an extended run to the second round or even into an Eastern Conference or an NBA championship game. Like, you want to take that next level. And what JB's been able to, he always pushes the right button somehow. It's kind of like what Francona has been able to do all these years. You take it for granted what he accomplished, and you push the right button and you get the best out of the guys around you. You might not have the best players, but you find a way to get what you need out of the group that you have. And you can easily, and I thought last year, the JB should have been a top 3 finalist for NBA Coach of the Year, and he wasn't even in that mix. I mean, you do have the Chris Finch at Minnesota, because they've had a nice turnaround this year, but they got some number 1 overall picks on that team, not where the Cavaliers are standing. And I think in a top-heavy East is much better than what the West has up top as well. So you can easily make that case, and there's no doubt in my mind that JB should be one of the top 3, if not win that award come season end, depending on how these last 20 games go.
Well, there were mumblings by a percentage of fans to have Bickerstaff replaced, and certainly as recently as a couple of years ago, Kobe Altman. And here, now look at him. You don't hear that anymore, Gene.
No, all it takes is a little winning, and we're in that microwave environment where everyone wants those instant results. And if you don't get them, you know what? Fire. Let's find the next guy and let's replace this. And it's easy to say that sitting here, and the fantasy world, I think, takes over as well, where everyone knows better than the people that are in charge. But what they've been able to accomplish, sticking together with each other, believing in each other, has really benefited this team.
Can Altman keep this team together, specifically Mitchell? I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do in this day and age in the NBA because the league has allowed these players to almost be able to dictate where and when they want to leave and go to another franchise.
Yeah, and that's the part that's tough because we were able to witness it the first time around with LeBron and how he was able to manipulate the Miami's big three, and you were able to even see that a couple years earlier when Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce were able to get together
Boston.
in Boston, right? And so you've been able to see this, and the nice part with Donovan is you have all-star pieces around you now. So yes, maybe at some point you're going to want to go play in New York or Brooklyn or wherever the case may be. But right now, you seize the opportunity that's in front of you. You have this talented team around you with great leadership, with a guy in Dan Gilbert who we know has deep pockets and only wants the best for his franchise. So if you're a guy like Mitchell now, what's the incentive to leave? Yeah, the Knicks might be a little bit better of a team and maybe on the rise, I should say, not a better team because you look at the record and the Cavaliers are in front of them. But you live in the moment right now, and you're making this team relevant again. Something that they haven't had on a LeBron list team since the '90s when Price and Doherty and Nance are here. So why not be the face of that franchise? And it can work. You watch what LeBron put the Cavaliers on the map. Why not continue that and make your own legacy here instead of going to that bigger market and trying to reap the benefits there? You still have your shoe deals. You still have everything going for you right now. And you're playing in maybe a more relaxed environment, especially with the media base and everything else that's here. Just enjoy the time and continue to hone your craft and become one of the top players in the NBA. So I can't wait to see what else he can accomplish. I mean, just in this short, let's just call it 2 years or year and a half with Donovan Mitchell. I mean, he's already second in the franchise in 40-point games. He's approaching numerous records and accomplishing this with only 2 seasons under his belt. It's amazing. I mean, you go back to last year, he becomes the team's all-time 3-point leader in a single season by just playing 1 year here. I mean, there's so much that you could accomplish here. And I think, as you've talked about for 20 plus years and even going back, probably 40 plus years, Cleveland is a nice market to be in. People like to bash on it and say how bad it is and make all their late night jokes. But when you get here and you're in this environment and you see what Cleveland has to offer, why leave? Why? You're going to get your money. You're going to be a good team that is going to make playoff runs, championship runs. Everything that you want is right here.
Let's proceed to the playoffs and make some early predictions. Philadelphia just came in and defeated the Cavaliers without Embiid. What is the latest on his injury status, and how big of a threat are they should they meet the Cavs?
Yeah, and that's the part. I mean, Embiid should be out another 4 to 6 weeks. They're going to reevaluate him, so he should be coming back middle of March, maybe a little bit later. So he'll get a couple of games before postseason play starts, so he could get reacclimated with the team and everyone could get used to each other again. So I think Philadelphia could be a threat for the Cavaliers, and I think the one reason is Nick Nurse, their new head coach. Nurse was fantastic when he was in Toronto, won a championship there. It seemed like Toronto always gave J.B. Bickerstaff and the Cavaliers fits when Nick Nurse was the head coach there. So there's maybe a little bit of a mental game there that the Cavaliers, maybe a little bit of a hurdle that the Cavaliers will have to get over. But the Cavaliers beat them in overtime right before Thanksgiving. I know last week or 2 weeks ago before the All-Star break, Philadelphia knocked them off here without Embiid. You have a guy like Maxey who's an all-star. I think there are pieces in Philadelphia that are nice, but I don't know if they're better than New York. I don't know if they're better than Milwaukee. Yes, Embiid is the reigning MVP, and he is a big piece of it. And things obviously change, as we were talking about earlier, when you have a post guy that you can work through and be dominant, which Embiid can be once postseason time comes around. I think the biggest factor in the hurdle will be what Nick Nurse puts together if they were to meet in the playoffs before advancing, however far they get before they meet up. I think that's the physical hurdle, or mental hurdle, I should say, that the Cavaliers will have to get by.
Were you shocked that Milwaukee made this coaching change in mid-season, considering the kind of year they were having? And what is the explanation?
Yeah, right. I'm totally surprised. And that's the part, like, maybe just because you have your two all-stars and Giannis and Dame Lillard, and you're expecting just to win every game and be like the Golden State team from a couple years ago, or that Chicago team of 96 that reeled off 70 games and barely lost. Maybe that was the expectation that ownership had for this team when you put two superstars together, not taking in consideration that they're going to have to take time to gel. You're going to have to take that time to get used to a new head coach. And they were second, third, fourth seed in the NBA, in the Eastern Conference. When you make that move, yes, Doc Rivers is a nice piece and a very good head coach that's dangling out there. So maybe the attraction, the flashy lights and the flashiness of Doc Rivers is what sparked that move. To me, I don't get it. And I think Doc said it this weekend. He was surprised that they made that move to bump Griffin out of there and bring him in. Doc Rivers has the one claim to fame of winning with Boston, having some very good seasons with them. But in his 20 plus years of coaching, he's won championship. And it seems like he gets treated like, a Phil Jackson or some of these guys that have ripped off multiple titles year after year after year. But his teams weren't even in NBA finals year after year after year. I think some of those Clippers teams that he had underachieved. So I'm interested to see how this continues to play out. Now you have Now you have a little bit of time before the playoffs to get used to his system. Him getting used to the guys. I do like the move of Milwaukee bringing in Patrick Beverly from Philadelphia. I think that's the one piece that they were missing early on, was a defender. They moved Drew Holiday in the offseason, where he was able to score and defend. So getting Patrick Beverly back, a guy that can score, you're not going to expect the same numbers that Drew Holiday last year. But Beverly is a very good defender. So that might be that piece that Milwaukee is missing. But the Cavaliers have had success against Milwaukee in the past. Obviously, Giannis is going to put up his huge numbers every time they play. So I'm not there yet. I'm probably a little bit more worried about Philly than I am Milwaukee for when those two teams potentially meet up in the playoffs.
Can anybody beat Boston?
That is the one that has me worried. I mean, I know Porzingis blew up when he first came out because he played for New York and then started bouncing around the league. But he's a very good center. He can stretch the floor. He can go out and hit a three if he needs to. We know what Tatum and Brown can do. Tatum, another year as an all-star safety. They're probably the best scoring duo, or you could make the case as the best scoring duo in the NBA. They're always top 5 year after year with combined points. They are the team that is the one that I think I'm scared of the most. I think they're in prime position again to go back and be in the NBA Finals, getting that experience, that taste last season, and just coming up short. They're a team that I think everyone in the East will have trouble with, and I think the Cavaliers are going to fall right in that boat. I mean, we talked about Isaac Okoro earlier being a very good defender for the Cavaliers. Well, he can only take Brown or Tatum. Then the other, you have to find a way to slow down or try to stop the other one, which I don't know if the Cavaliers has that guy on the roster that can slow down one of those two stars. So Boston, that's going to be the team that everyone in the East and even maybe in the West should be targeting and looking out for over these final weeks and then as the postseason goes along.
As you know, you've heard me say this throughout the years. Before a season would start in Major League Baseball, you could make a case for maybe 10 teams, 11 teams to win the World Series. In the NFL, 6 or 7. In the NHL, 20, easily 20. But in the NBA, 1 or 2, which used to be the case, obviously, with Golden State and the Cavaliers for that matter here in the East. But that's no longer the case. And the West this year is a perfect example of that, is it not?
Absolutely. And I was going to even say for the Cavs in these last 20 games, they have a bunch of on their schedule coming up. A lot of teams that are towards the bottom of the rankings or in the standings in their respective divisions, teams that you're expected to beat, which they've been able to do this year so far. But when you look at how the league is evolving, I guess I think you can make a case for some of those teams in the East. You know, you see Atlanta, what they've been able to do each year. If Trae Young gets hot, they can make a run or two in the playoffs. I don't think they're an Eastern Conference Finals, and I definitely don't think they're a championship team. Chicago, until their injuries, you could have made a case for them. Orlando is a young team. They're kind of how I'm viewing both Minnesota and Oklahoma City in the West. They're young teams where they need to get that experience of the postseason, but they might just be young enough not to understand it yet and be able to win a round or two. When you look at what Minnesota has been able to accomplish this year, Karl Anthony Towns has been great. He's a big that can both play in the post and come out and hit a number of threes. We're able to see that if you watch that so-called All-Star game that they played a couple nights ago.
We're going to get to that in a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then for Oklahoma City, it's a team that has been going through a couple of coaches. Now you finally settled on a guy, and Gilgeous-Alexander is putting up phenomenal numbers. It seems like he's scoring 30 every single night. And then the bottom half of the West, with your Dallases, with both Luka and Kyrie Irving, we know what Kyrie Irving can do once postseason basketball comes around. And Luka has been phenomenal all season long. Sacramento was a 3 seed last year. Now they're down in that bottom half, maybe into the playoff portion. You can never count out a LeBron team, even though he's 40, but still putting up numbers. Golden State fluttering down there, in that playoff play-in range. So I think the bottom half of the West is still can make some noise depending on the matchups. But I'm very interested to see how the young Bucks on that side, the Minnesotas, the Oklahoma Cities, even Denver coming back from defending their championship that they won last year, how they respond coming back to the West. But I think there's a lot more parity, I guess, in the league now than there was years back. I mean, I would still take some of the named teams until some of these young teams start to prove what they can do. But it's starting to maybe balance itself out or get a little bit closer now, where you're not just saying Golden State, the Lakers, and this team are the only 3 or only 5 that can win a championship.
If I force you to make a pick in the West, who is it?
I really like Phoenix, but I don't trust them enough yet to go out on that limb. I think the Clippers have the right parts, but again, I don't think they can mesh together. And again, you have to wait to see over these last couple of weeks the health of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Can they make it through the rest of the season? I like that little mix there, but I think you still have to go back to Golden State and the Lakers until someone can knock out the Lakers early, and until someone can slow down Steph and Clay and the guys in Golden State. I think those are still the 2 that I lean to until I physically can see somebody else knocking them off.
When are they going to come to their senses and get rid of this ridiculous excuse called an all-star game? You and I both know that won't happen because it's all about money and bringing in money to whatever city they choose. But I mean, come on. 211 to 186? What an embarrassment. And here's the thing that kills me. This is really the bottom line to it. Every player on the winning team gets $100,000 bonus in that so-called all-star game The Players Association, they came to this agreement with ownership. The losers get $25,000, but the winners get $100,000, and they increased it from $50,000 to $100,000 because their motive was to give an incentive so the players would be more competitive in this game. How's that working out? 211 to 186?
Yeah, I I was amazed. This is probably the first All-Star game that I've watched in maybe 10 years, at least 5 for sure. And my daughter wanted to watch it, so we watched from start to finish. I want to say by the end of the first quarter, she was checked out. She was on her device, on doing whatever else besides watching the rest of the game. And that was the part that you mentioned. You put these incentives in so you have a game. I mean, Larry Bird talked about it before the game even started. I hope there's a little bit of defense played, especially even when you watch the All-Star games of the early 2000s or maybe even into the 2010s. You would play 3 quarters of whatever happened, and nobody cared. But by the time the fourth quarter came around, guys would then D up and try to play a little bit of defense. Not saying that we're going full NBA Finals defense, at least and matted defense, letting guys just you were actually trying to play. So I was thinking, well, maybe the same thing will happen again, and we'll see some defense. But it was even worse. I mean, the guys would just catch the ball, walk down, make a layup, or another guy would come this way and dunk, and you would just see everyone move out of the way. You had the whole key open if you wanted to drive. Most of the guys wanted to shoot 3-pointers anyways. You had 79 makes or something crazy like that. So at one point in the first quarter, I want to say there was still 30 seconds left, and Luka was taking a 3-quarter scored shot. He shot it from the other foul line and didn't even hit the basket. I mean, it's just an embarrassment, and it should go the same way as the Pro Bowl. Just go away. The only
football,
All-Star game that's worth watching.
Even baseball now, Gene. Even baseball has become a joke, and that used to be, without question, a very meaningful game, especially before interleague play when we still had the distinction of American and National League.
And at least you can watch that, though. At least it resembles a little bit of baseball. You still have to pitch and hit the ball somehow. This is just, that would be like Jose Ramirez coming up and the ball's just on a tee for him, and he just swinging with nobody there.
Speaking of baseball, thank goodness the Guardians are in the division that we are in, because it is still the weakest division in all of Major League Baseball. And I'm actually, in the next segment here, as I conclude with you, going to start previewing the divisions. I'm going to start with the National League West. But how do you think the Guardians will be this year, Gene? Your favorite sport is baseball, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview.
For me, I think that the Guardians are in a great spot within this division because you have starting pitching. And as we know, pitching is what will win you games. It might not be sexy. It might be a 2-3 game, or a 3-2 or a 2-1 game where everyone wants to see offense. But this is how this team will have to win ball games. And I think last year, the experience that some of the young guys were able to get due to the injuries, I think that's all. And even this bullpen and this team in general, just going forward, where you were able to see what a guy like Tanner Bybee was able to do. And, if the reports are right about Shane Bieber and getting some of his velocity back, not that that's a big thing anyways, because he's such a fantastic pitcher and he could win games, not just relying on speed.
Yeah.
I think that's only going to help this team. And yeah, they didn't make the big splash or this big move in the offseason, but really
not
nobody
many teams
has.
did.
There's so many names still out there.
I know. Not many teams did. It was the most inactive offseason. How do you think Vogt will do?
I think he'll be fine. I mean, I think it will be this feeling out process that will next couple of weeks here in the exhibition play, in Cactus League play, trying to figure out what he has. And obviously he knows it. He's watched enough baseball, and I'm sure he did enough research and off-season work here to know what each player has to offer. I think he'll be fine. And I think, as you mentioned to start this, you're in such a weak division. That can also help him a little bit too, knowing that he can kind of ease into this role. If he comes in trying to replace Terry Francona right away, that issue. But I think he's more that guy. I think he's going to just fit in perfectly. Just being removed from a couple of years from playing, just coming into the dugout, I think that's going to help him as well. I think he's um, potentially the right guy to replace a legend like Terry Francona, just to come in, ease into his system, find his feet. I don't think it's going to be a Manny Acta situation that we experienced years ago. I think this is going to be a much better situation for the Guardians and moving forward.
Gene Winters, the statistical graphic designer for the Cleveland Cavaliers, former producer extraordinaire for yours truly for so many years. We'll call upon you again as we approach the playoffs, Gino, if that's okay. I want to pick your brain again as we get near the postseason.
Anytime. I'm always around and look forward to it. And Ryan, it was nice meeting you here today, and it's always a pleasure of mine to join you. So anytime, just give me a call.
Gene Winters, be back in a minute. I'm going to take a look at the National League West to start our divisional previews. And it's the Ask Bruce segment on Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network.
Now here is the risk round had to take with
All right, great to have you back with us on Bonus Time with Drennan and the Big Play Sports Network. As I mentioned earlier, every week now, between now and the start of the baseball season, we're going to take a division and preview it for you. So today I want to start with the National League West, and not much to say about the Colorado Rockies outside of the fact that Bud Black's an old friend of mine from when he used to pitch for the Cleveland Indians. I don't see Colorado being able to contend. Their pitching staff leaves a lot to be desired. They do have Cal Quantrill, who was a former Guardian and Indian, but now he's a Rocky. They also have another former Indian in the likes of Nolan Jones, and he has blossomed over there, hitting .297 with 20 homers and 62 RBIs and only 367 at-bats a year ago. He also had 20 stolen bases, so I'm kind of disappointed we were not able to hold on to him because he could blossom into a star in the National League. Chris Bryant, the former Cub, was hurt a good portion of last season. Charlie Blackmon, same thing. He's now 37 years old. Don't look for much out of the Colorado Rockies. San Francisco Giants are an odd team to predict because one year they'll surprise everybody in the big show and the next year they'll be lousy. They do have this Ho Lee from the Korean baseball organization, who's going to be a fascinating player to watch. I also picked up Jorge Soler, a 3-year, $42 million contract, and the Panda is going to try to make a comeback for him. Pablo Sandoval, who is going to try to come back, and that's going to be an interesting story with them. J.D. Davis is an interesting player. He'll be manning third base. Mike Yastrzemski starts the season hurt. Their top prospect's a kid by the name of Marco Luciano. He's going to start at shortstop, and it'll be interesting to follow him. I think their pitching leaves a lot to be desired. Logan Webb, Jordan Hicks will be a starter now after being a reliever all those years with St. Louis. He was an off-season addition. But they're starting with behind the eight ball to begin with because both Alex Cobb and Robbie Ray are on the injured list to start the season. Ray, as a matter of fact, is on the 60-day IL. Camilo Duvall, a tremendous closer, had 39 saves with a 1.14 whip. That's walks and hits for innings pitched. He's really, really good. Hard to predict San Francisco. Who knows? The San Diego Padres, my goodness. You consider the money that they have spent and have absolutely nothing to show for it. Yeah, they made the playoffs a couple of years ago, but let's face it, this has been a tremendous disappointment for them. They lost Josh Hader, Blake Snell to free agency. They traded Soto and Grisham to the Yankees. All the while, the Dodgers were adding superstars, and Arizona also made some significant additions. So, San Diego, I think, is in for another disappointing season. They've got to have a great year out of Musgrove and Yu Darvish and their pitching staff, but the rest of it is suspect. Certainly Machado had elbow surgery, so can he bounce back? Fernando Tatis is still a great player. Bogarts is actually going to switch from short to second, and Kim's going to go from second to short. So we'll see what happens with San Diego, but I'm not that optimistic about them. And that brings me to the team that surprised everybody in baseball a year ago, the Arizona Diamondbacks. My goodness gracious. Who would have predicted that they could catch fire like they did? Their owner, Ken Kendrick, says that we now expect to play in October after manager Torey Lavallo, who used to be with the Cleveland organization, by the way, led the Diamondbacks to a surprising National League pennant a year ago. They only won 84 games. Think of that. They only won 84 games last year, but they qualified for the postseason by one single game, and then they caught fire. They were actually outscored during the regular season. Can you believe that? They will enter the year with the highest payroll in club history because they added Eduardo Rodriguez from Detroit, Eduardo Suarez, Jock Peterson, and Randy Grichuk. They also are seeking a new stadium, but they've got a really nice club. Zach Gallen, 17-9 record a year ago, 220 strikeouts and 210 innings pitched. Merrill Kelly glittered in the postseason, 12-8 record during the regular campaign with a 3.29 ERA. And of course, Rodriguez was on his way to serious Cy Young consideration with Detroit last year before he got hurt. This Corbin Carroll is a fantastic player in right field. He hit 285 with 25 home runs and 76 RBIs. But get this, he had 30 doubles and he had 54 stolen bases. He had 10 triples. What a talent. Marte, 276 average, 25 home runs and 82 RBIs. And Christian Walker, didn't hit for the average, but 33 home runs and 103 RBIs with 36 doubles. He's really an underrated power hitter batting in the cleanup position. I mentioned those additions. Gurriel had 24 homers and 82 RBIs with 35 doubles. They have plenty of firepower. And then they get Suarez, who will hit in the bottom third of their order. And if he catches fire, I mean, he can put up 30 home runs. He's done so before as a Cincinnati Red and with the Seattle Mariners. So they're a team to really watch, especially with Seawald, their closer, who had 34 saves a year ago. But anything short, not just a divisional championship, anything short of a National League pennant for the Los Angeles Dodgers will be catastrophic for them. Because when you add an Ohtani, let alone this Yoshi Yamamoto, to an already loaded team, I mean, how can you not have the highest of high expectations? Mookie Betts, 307 average, 39 homers, 107 RBIs with 40 doubles and 14 stolen bases. Freddie Freeman, 331 average, 29 homers, 102 RBIs, 59 doubles he had last year, and he also had 23 stolen bases. Let alone Will Smith with 19 homers and 76 RBIs. Who cares what the batting average is for Max Muncy? He gets 36 home runs and 105 RBIs just about every year. And then a key for them will be Gavin Lux, the young shortstop who's coming back after a serious injury a year ago. They're hoping that he realizes his potential. They picked up Teoscar Hernandez. That's a great addition to their team. Yet alone Yamamoto, considered the best pitcher in Japan. Tyler Glasnow was acquired during the offseason, along with Miller and Paxton and Sheehan. And don't forget, they're going to eventually get Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler back. I mean, it's unbelievable how loaded they are, let alone Ohtani, with a 304 batting average, 44 homers, 95 RBIs, and 20 stolen bases. He'll start as their DH. I don't know if he's going to pitch or not. They say there's no timetable on him pitching, but goodness gracious, the Dodgers on paper are incredibly loaded, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, you go look at that Dodgers roster, right? It was already amazing last year. it just got even better this year. So you got to imagine, as you mentioned, anything less than that NL pennant. And to be honest, a World Series win is going to look at, when you look at the season as a whole, it's got to almost seem like a failure if you don't reach those goals. But we do know just last year, for an example, as you mentioned with Arizona, when you get to the big dance, anybody can be that last one dancing there. And it'll be awesome, right? I'm excited. Arizona clearly has a bright future. Corbin Carroll seems like a superstar in the making.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of funny looking at the Padres, right? Juan Soto, as you mentioned, Manny Ramirez, excuse me, Manny Machado. I mean, I just don't understand. I don't understand it, but I guess that's the beauty of baseball, Bruce, that anything can happen. And I guess comparing the Padres to the Guardians, like, yeah, we're not spending that money, but you look at a team like the Padres who are spending that money and they're having the same, if not worse, results. So anything can happen. But I mean, I've never seen a more stacked baseball team in my whole entire life than I have this Dodgers team.
Well, wait till we get to the National League East and I talk about the Atlanta Braves.
Very true.
I think they're comparable, but that'll be in a few weeks. All right. Next week, I'll take a look at the American League West for us as we preview the baseball season. Time now for the Ask Bruce segment. Ryan, take it away.
All right. Well, let's stick with baseball here, Bruce, while we're at it. Question, Bruce, how do you suppose baseball keeps its popularity internationally while struggling to draw interest of the younger generation in the U.S.?
The problem isn't international. The problem is domestic. Internationally, baseball is a tremendously popular sport. In Asia, Japan, do you know what the ratings are in Japan for years in baseball? My goodness, since Suzuki was with Seattle, Hideki Matsui was with the Yankees, all these phenoms. Now you've got Ohtani, who's off the charts. This Yamamoto, same thing. Their ratings, they'll get up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning to watch these games in the United States. It's unbelievable. Korean baseball, incredibly popular. Taiwan, incredibly popular. So Asia is internationally extremely popular. Baseball is. Obviously, the Caribbean countries in South America continue to produce absolutely tremendously talented players, and ratings down there are off the charts. I mentioned earlier, I vacationed in Mexico for so many years, the Caribbean World Series going on before spring training starts. The ratings for that are off the charts with Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. I mean, it's unbelievable. So it's not international, it's domestic. And let me be more specific. Racially speaking, African-American kids in this country are playing football and basketball. They are not playing baseball like they should, as far as numbers are concerned. Now, every major league team pours money into the inner city to support youth, black little leagues and pony leagues, etc. But still, these kids are deciding to play football or basketball instead. Look at Deion Sanders and Jackson. They both chose football. In Sanders' case, it worked out. Not for Jackson. He got hurt with the Oakland Raiders and would have had an unbelievable career with the Kansas City Royals. And I think Sanders would have been a real superstar with the Atlanta Braves based on what he did that one World Series against Minnesota. So that's part of it. Now, let's also racially talk about the Caucasian kids. They're playing soccer. And it's unbelievable how at that young age, grammar school age, how these soccer fields are filled to the brim with kids playing soccer, with parents bringing their lounge chairs and their coolers and watching their boys and girls play soccer because they can play together. And then there's 2 baseball diamonds right next to all these soccer fields and guys walking their dogs in the outfield. I mean, give me a break. So that's the real problem in this country. And the other problem, Ryan, is the atrociously bad job that Major League Baseball has done with marketing. In comparison, I'm so sick of Peyton Manning and Eli Manning coming in with those pizzas or whatever. He walks into the room, yeah, and then Peyton Manning saying, oh, here we go again. I mean, we almost know the commercial by heart. How many commercials do you see with baseball players?
Not many. All right, the next one, Bruce, we're going to dive into some basketball now for these last two. So, to draw back to the All-Star game, the question is, do you think that it's a possibility and / a good thing for the NBA to possibly turn the All-Star game like the MLB All-Star game, where the winner would then get home court advantage for the East or West, the winner of that, like they do in baseball?
I didn't like that at all with baseball, but you know what? This has become such a joke. That would have been a good question for Gene when we had him on, Ryan. I don't even know if that, because the players that are on teams that are not in contention, what incentive do they have? Although they got the $100,000, I guess, like I mentioned, the Players Association negotiating that with the owners. So I guess that it could be. That's an interesting concept. I also saw where they may actually consider the Americans against the international team, because there's so many players from other countries now playing in the NBA, and you could come up with quite an all-star team to go up against the Americans.
Alrighty, last one here. If you had the choice, they want to know, would you choose, if you were the Cavaliers, would you choose to, in that second round, if it's a possible matchup, would you think it's a good thing to play the Knicks again, given that they beat you last year and you could use that as motivation, or would you prefer to avoid them again?
I wouldn't be afraid to. I wouldn't be afraid of anybody if I were the Cavaliers. That's the attitude they'd have to have, and I do like the incentive factor of revenge. I always like revenge when it comes to sports, no matter what sport it is. I think that can be very motivating to a team, and particularly to a Cavs team who was so out physical by New York a year ago. So I would welcome a series against New York to prove that they can beat this team and soundly beat them. So yeah, I would look forward to that very much.
I agree with you, Bruce. I think that'd be a huge incentive for the Cavaliers, and if anything, I think they would welcome the opportunity to get back and get their revenge in that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this version of Bonus Time with Drennan. I'm Bruce Drennan on behalf of Ryan Smith. Hope you enjoyed the show, lining up some guests for next week's program, as well as another look at a division. I mentioned we're going to take a look at the American League West next week and everything else that's happening in the world of sports. So you stay tuned. Have a great week. And until we see you next week on the show here on the Big Play Sports Network, as always, and most importantly, you remember, I love you, Ohio. And I love you.